Hi, and welcome to R&R Living Life. In this episode, we begin our journey along the Great Central Road, making our way to Yalara. We were heading along the most isolated road in Australia. The Great Central Road is part of the Outback Way that runs from Laverton to Winton in Queensland and has its origins in the early 1930s, when Warburton was established as a missionary settlement and supplies were delivered from Laverton via a rough bush track. It is said to be a shortcut across Australia, crossing 3 states and a number of time zones. We had read that the route is mostly gravel, but is graded and regularly maintained, with conditions that include corrugations and sand drifts that can quickly change without warning. Outback Way spans over 2,700 kilometres from Laverton to Winton, and we were looking forward to the isolation and harsh environments, some of the most barren we had ever travelled through. The road had been closed for some time early in the year due to flooding. According to what we had read, there is meant to be over 200 wrecked cars dating back to the 1970s scattered along this stretch of road, but we were not interested in them, but more the country we were travelling through. Laverton is on the edge of the Great Victorian Desert, the biggest desert in Australia, covering some 350,000 square kilometres. Boy, were we in for a treat. Rick had obtained the relevant permits required to travel through the area, as it was all through Indigenous lands, with several communities scattered along its length. Our aim was to stop at the 3 roadhouses along the way, with the first Cookayula 315 kilometres from Laverton. The next stop would be at Warburton, a further 250 or so kilometres along, and then at Warracoona, another 230 kilometres, giving us time to stretch our legs and check the boat and gidget at each stop. We were in no hurry and were happy to take it as it came, stopping whenever we felt the need or to just look around when we found something interesting to look at. Fuel in these remote and isolated areas is sometimes scarce, especially if rain has cut the roads. Regular 98 fuel was non-existent and we had to use opal, which has been altered to remove the aromatics to reduce the likelihood of being used as a drug, as petrol sniffing is a horrible practice in some of the communities in the outback. The other concern was the opening hours of the roadhouses, as all roadhouses open at slightly different times and have different arrangements for people who arrive outside their regular trading hours, and may charge a call-out fee if required fuel outside of the regular hours, with 2 operating on Western Australian time and 1 on Central time. Both Gidget and the boat had been checked, and we had more than enough supplies to last us, as I am old school and travel with more than is necessary, just in case. A leftover from living in rural areas where you can be cut off for months. After breakfast and a final check over everything, we left Laverton. It was quite cold this morning, with the temperature of 3.5 degrees feeling like 1, not ideal for a cold frog like me. Just out of Laverton we crossed a floodway with water on both sides of the road. I was hoping it was not an ominous sign of things to come, but did watch the clouds that were hanging around the horizon. The 8-kilometre floodway sign reminded me of our Western New South Wales trip along the Silver City Highway between Broken Hill and Milporinka. The position of the sun was challenging for me, as often the shadows from the clouds and the position of the sun in the sky made some of the photos dark, but have included them as it was how it was. At one point in the drive we passed a huge washout along the side of the road, and can only imagine the amount of water that ran down the side that caused such a wash. The burrow pits on the driver's side of the road were full with black swans and ducks that were enjoying the recent rains that filled them. I found it hard to believe there was so much green, but after the rains that had passed through the area early on in the year, and to have had it topped up recently, made the scenery so crisp and fresh. The Laverton Shire covers some 183,198 square kilometres of predominantly desert and pastoral country, with spinifex plains, mulga woodlands and unique granite rocky outcrops, as well as rich Aboriginal and European history and culture. It was surprising the length of bitumen at the beginning of our trip, and I know that there are plans to bitumen the length of the Great Central Way. We wanted to check out Delta Rock Hole, about 40 kilometres from Laverton, but it was too hard to find, so continued on. We stopped in at Giles Jindalee Breakaway, a plateau formed by erosion just off the main road, accessed by a dirt track. Years and years of weathering has removed the sands and revealed the underlying rocks, which are much more resistant to the weathering. At Giles Breakaway, the weathering has created a canyon-like breakaway. What an amazing view! The Great Victoria Desert is in fact characterised by sandhill and dune fields, along with very old lakes, now dry or just salt, and rocky prominences such as the Giles Breakaway. The natural beauty and peaceful atmosphere, topped with the stunning views, was impressive. There is something magical about the colours, especially the rich red against the washed white sandstone below. The striations in the landscape are the result of layers of sediment created when these basins were inundated by sea thousands of millions of years ago, with the sediments carved over the millennia by runoff from countless rains, eventually exposing the spectacular colour patterns. The vast cloud-streaked skies gave for a soft pastel vista, but it was still impressive. The sun, when it shone through the clouds, emphasised the red cliffs. Giles Breakaway is a part of Laverton Station, a pastoral lease that has operated as both a cattle station and a sheep station. The station was also home to some famous faces, including R.M. Williams, who built a huge water tank there when he visited and was living in the region. Just as we got back on the Great Central Road, we hit the gravel and turned on the caravan to stop the dust in Gidget. We passed through stretches of red dirt, spinifex grasslands and scrubby bush. The landscape changes constantly from wide open plains to low rolling hills with the occasional sandstone outcrop. Though the road was corrugated, overall it wasn't all that bad. Rick kept an eye out for washouts that needed to be dodged. We passed a clay pan with a waterhole full of water. The Great Victoria Desert is the largest desert in Australia at 348,750 square kilometres and the seventh largest desert in the world, with some of the oldest rocks on Earth dating between 2,500 and 2,900 million years old. The main characteristic of the Great Victoria Desert is the east-west trending sandhills, which are presumably caused by the strong prevailing westerly winds. The area around Cosmos Newbury was originally leased by two returned soldiers as a cattle station, then a government-run detention centre for a short time. The town was first settled in 1920, with the settlement also opened as a government-run rations outpost for the nomadic Aboriginals who inhabited the desert area as far east as the South Australian border. Cosmos Newbury Station closed as a detention centre and was handed over to the United Aborigines Mission in 1953. The Uniting Church had set up a mission there, but eventually, in 1976, gave the land back to the Aboriginal people living in the area at the time, with the town operating for 11 years before becoming abandoned for 4 years. Then, in 1989, 4 families moved back into the town before others quickly followed. Cosmos Newbury is one stop along the Central Road that tracks through the Great Victorian Desert and eventually connects with the Gun Barrel Highway. About 100 kilometres from Laverton, we passed Mount Jones and Mount Shenton, with roadworks happening around the turn-off to the mine. We were passing through red sand country on both sides of the road. We stopped in at Minnie Creek roadside rest stop for a walk around and morning coffee. On a rocky outcrop in the Hoffman Range we came across the White Cross, erected by the Aboriginal Christians in 1991, as a reminder to all who pass of Jesus Christ's sacrifice on the cross, which Christians believe brings forgiveness, healing, hope, and everlasting life. The area has given life and spiritual sustenance to humans for thousands of years here in the shade, with their water and an abundant food source. Today it remains as a symbol of hope for all humanity into the future. It is a fascinating part of the vast outback where the extraordinary mulga, an iconic Australian tree, plays an important life-giving role for Aboriginals as a food source. The seeds can be separated from their pods, moistened with water and ground to make an edible paste or baked into a cake. The sweet sap produced by the plant can be sucked straight from the plant or dissolved in water to make a refreshingly sweet drink. Honeypot ants, an Aboriginal delicacy, store honey obtained from the mulga flowers in their bodies. Even the hardwood, when polished, turns dark red-brown and makes excellent bowls, tools and weapons. We were amazed by the number of zebra finches in the vicinity, rushing in and out in mobs to drink at the shallow waterhole. The art on the inside of the cave appeared to be too recent to be of importance. I can only hope that I am wrong, as it would be such a shame for the site to be vandalised. In the distance we could just make out Lake Throsell, a loose chain of salt lakes and salt pans. As we drove back onto the road we passed a herd of camels, our first sighting of them. Camels were first imported to Australia in the 1840s as a beast of burden for exploration and development in arid areas. By the mid-1890s, more than 4,500 had been introduced for use in the goldfields of Central and Western Australia. Camels, which have reverted to the wild state, are said to be feral. The first feral camels in Western Australia were those lost or stolen from early explorers. Additional releases of domestic camels into the wild occurred when the motor vehicle became commonplace in outlying areas in the 1920s and 1930s. There are probably at least 300,000 feral camels in Australia, the only substantial feral camel population in the world. Feral camels are spread throughout Central Australia. They are generally confined to the deserts, being only occasionally seen on sheep and cattle stations in Western Australia, though we had seen them while working around Dajara in Queensland. Just after 1 o'clock we stopped in for fuel at Cookayilla Roadhouse. Such welcoming and friendly staff. We treated ourselves to the most amazing burger we had ever had. It was outstanding, even without the beetroot, that they were unable to supply on it. But then again, we had been trying to buy beetroot ever since we had left Queensland over 3.5 months ago. Cookayella Roadhouse, which takes its name from the nearby rock holes, is also known as the Zoo Roadhouse because of all the animals like dingoes, emus, camels, kangaroos, and even birds that can be seen at times around the roadhouse. After lunch we continued along the Great Central Road, past the Kurrajong Sentinel, the last specimen of the Kurrajong tree in this area. Hopefully nothing happens to it, as it is very close to the roadside. Seen from a distance, this desert Kurrajong, with its bright green leaves and rounded shady crown, appears out of place in this harsh environment, but it is endemic to this area. It has the ability to survive through dry conditions. Gum from the tree is edible. Its seeds can be roasted then ground to make a bush coffee or damper, and the roots of the tree can be eaten or used to gain water. It has also been made popular as an ornamental tree around the globe. It is truly an amazing tree. We made camp that first day on the Great Central Road at an old roadworks campsite not far from a burnt-out truck. I spent what was left of the afternoon being entertained by the multitude of finches flitting around Gidget and in the nearby trees and spinifex. We were careful in choosing the site as we had been travelling through indigenous lands most of the day. What a day our first day travelling along the Great Central Road had been! Initially developed as a series of tracks used by Aboriginal communities for trade and travel, over the years it has been transformed into a defined route to facilitate mining operations and connect remote communities, and is now an important link between Western Australia and the Northern Territory. The road passes through lands inhabited by First Nations people for millennia, with communities rich in traditions and with a deep connection to the country. As we settled down for the night, Rick and I had lots to think about. After a very restful night, we woke to a frosty morning. The boat was covered in frost. Once we had had our breakfast and given the boat time to defrost a little, we continued on our journey through this amazing country. As we were travelling east, the morning was quite hazy, and heading into the sun often made it difficult to take photos. A car had passed by about half an hour before we had left camp, so dust hung in the hollows in places, giving an eerie feeling to our travels. Between long stretches of straight road, then crest to traverse, followed by swinging corners, Rick and I were enjoying the drive. The undulating road was in places quite corrugated with occasional bulldust patches. It was hard for me to think we were in the desert with so much vegetation around. We were travelling through ever-changing country of mulga, saltbush and spinifex, with sand ridges and hills. The scenery was breathtaking. This adventure of ours was taking us through some awesome country. The spinifex seed heads made the countryside appear golden in the early morning light. It really was a magical place, leaving us with a feeling of a deeper connection to the land. With nearly a fifth of Australia covered in desert, I am not sure what I had expected, with 70% of Australia considered either arid or semi-desert land. The Great Victorian Desert sits above the Nullarbor Plain and makes up roughly a quarter of South Australia. We must have been very lucky on our journey to see it covered in so much vegetation, certainly not what I had expected, but then again the heavy rains early in the year must have played a part in it looking so lush and healthy. I hope you have enjoyed this episode. Give us a thumbs up if you did. Join us next time as we continue along the Great Central Road. Take care and stay safe. Cheers for now. Rick and Rosemary. R&R, Live and Life.